Hello and welcome to Analysis with me, John Rees. Thousands have been killed since Nigeria's militant Islamist group, Boko Haram, launched its uprising in 2009. Nigeria is a resource-rich and Africa's most populous country. In the last 3 years, Boko Haram has killed 358 people, according to the government, but others estimate the true figure to be more than 1,500. Based largely in Nigeria's northwest, the militant group and its offshoot, Ansaru, has been fighting for more than 4 years to try and carve an Islamic state in this multi-religious and multi-ethnic country. Despite an all-out offensive ordered by President Goodluck Jonathan, the militants remain the top security threat to Africa's leading energy producer. Amnesty International said in a recent report that the brutal actions of Nigeria's security forces in response to Boko Haram's campaign of terror are making an already desperate situation even worse. Amnesty International also claimed to have credible information from a senior officer in the Nigerian Army that nearly 1,000 people, mostly suspected Islamist militants, have died in military custody in the first 6 months of this year alone. On the 13th of this month, the US State Department declared war on Boko Haram and Ansaru, classifying them as a foreign terrorist organisation. This means that the US regulatory agencies are instructed to block business and financial transactions with the group. It will become a crime under US law to provide material support for the group. Well, with me in the studio to discuss all this is Dr. Olawale Ismail, Head of Research at International Alert. And joining us on the phone from Washington is John Campbell, former United States Ambassador to Nigeria, expert on US foreign policy towards Africa, and author of a new book, Should the United States Fear Boko Haram? And on the phone from Nigeria, we have Mosai Segun, Nigeria researcher for the Human Rights Watch. And to complete our panel, we have Dr. David Lowe, lecturer in law, security and terrorism at Liverpool John Moores University. But before the discussion, let's take a look at this report.
On Wednesday, the US government designated Nigeria's Boko Haram as a foreign terrorist organisation, a move which allows the US to block financial transactions to the group. The State Department said the move is an important step to help Nigeria root out violent extremism. However, security analysts have pointed out that the new title may bolster the group's profile and encourage the militants by justifying their new status and seeking international terrorism links. Since 2011, almost 2,000 people have been killed in an attempt to violently enforce an Islamic state in Nigeria. Boko Haram, literally translated as Western education is sin, was established in 2002 and is the most recent incarnation of anti-Western sentiment that has existed in the country for over a century. The US suggestion of the group's link to al-Qaeda is disputed. Some experts view the group as an armed revolt against government corruption, abuse of security forces, and widening disparity in an already impoverished country. Reuters recently reported that women are being used as slaves by the militant group. This woman was held captive for 3 months before escaping.
When they captured me initially, I thought I was going to die because I was tied up with a rope around my neck and they removed a knife to slaughter me, but they later left me alone.
This week, President Goodluck Jonathan declared a state of emergency in 3 states. The offensive was welcomed by many, but rights groups are calling for restraint. As the scale and the scope of Boko Haram attacks continue to escalate, many are left wondering if the Nigerian state is still able to protect its own population. Tayana Simons, Islam Channel.
Well, let's take up the discussion first of all with John Campbell in Washington. John, you were ambassador there. You've written a book on the subject. Let's start with that. What are Boko Haram, and should the West fear them?
Boko Haram is a radical jihadist movement, highly diffuse, very decentralized. Its goal is to establish a pure Islamic state in the north, basically by imposing a rigorous form of Islamic law called Sharia on the population. Sharia already exists in northern Nigeria, but its enforcement is extremely variable. And the popular complaint is that Sharia applies to poor people, but not to rich people.
Olawale, do you think that this designation is going to help or make the problem worse, the designation of it being a fighting terrorist?
Well, you never know. But the antecedent suggests that it might actually complicate the problem because, one, it might shift the focus of Boko Haram's underlining demand, so the basis upon which Boko Haram emerged. It might shift it to the international scene. It might be seen in the context of Al-Qaeda. However, the core realities of Boko Haram and how it emerged in Nigeria is local. It is rooted in issues around poverty, around youth disempowerment, especially in the north. It is quite interesting that some of the socioeconomic opportunities that have been created in Nigeria since 1999, about 90% of them have been enjoyed by people from the west, from the south, both the southwest and the southeast, largely because the opportunities created were driven by private, enterprise. Private enterprise is not interested in national character or balancing ethno-political realities of Nigeria, but largely about we want the best qualified candidate to do this job. Who are those best qualified, best educated? And you find those in the southeast and the southwest part of Nigeria. So largely the youth in the northern part of Nigeria have lost out since 1999 in terms of annexing and accessing socioeconomic opportunities. Allied to that is the fact that if you look at the trajectory of Boko Haram, how it emerged, it's similar to how other militia groups that have emerged in other parts of Nigeria. What essentially that means is that if you take religion out of the equation, Boko Haram is not different from some of the other ethno-political militias that have emerged in Nigeria. In the southwest, you have the OPC. In the south-south, you have MEN and a number of other affiliate groups. And also in part of the central region, you have different kinds of militia, the Tiv militia, the Jukum militia, and all of this. So if you take Islam or religion out of that context, you will see that the trajectory of Boko Haram follows the same pattern as other ethnic militias that have emerged in Nigeria since 1999. What makes Boko Haram different is the international dimension, the emergence of Al-Qaeda in post-9/11 period in the first instance, and also the penetration of Al-Qaeda in sub-Saharan Africa, where you have Akim in Islamic Maghreb, and their influence stretching all the way down to the Sahel. And what you've had is because the Nigerian state mismanaged the initial Boko Haram uprising in 2009, it has actually, Nigerian state actually delivered and pushed Boko Haram to join Al-Qaeda.
Okay, well, let me put some of those points to David Lowe up in Liverpool. David, so what Olawale is suggesting here is that this is a movement with predominantly local roots, but that the kind of international dimension has become something which is part of the government's failure to deal with the initial uprising, and that possibly these most recent moves might worsen the situation. What's your take?
Yeah, I think what's also interesting is, as well as the US making them a banned group, the UK did a similar thing. We only under UK law, they're classed as proscribed organisations. But you look at Boko Haram, and there is no evidence of any link to Al-Qaeda, and they seem to be more of what we call a geopolitical group, trying to get some independence from the central government in Nigeria. Very similar to what you see in the Caucasus region with groups in Dagestan and Ingushetia who are trying to get independence from Russia. So I would go with it at the moment. The evidence seems to suggest that they're fighting really for political independence rather than being predominantly a religious ideology. There's very much a political ideology behind them.
Okay, so let me bring in our guest who's actually in Nigeria, and I might say you're from Human Rights Watch. What do you make of this? Do you think that it is essentially a locally rooted revolt produced mainly by social and economic conditions and by the response of the government there, or do you think that this is part of a kind of Islamist international franchise?
Yes, Carl, I totally agree that there are economic dimensions to the emergence of Boko Haram and other militant groups in Nigeria. But I think that, can you hear me clearly?
Yes, I can hear you, yeah.
Okay, but I think that there are disturbing and complex diverse factors to the operations of Boko Haram from its emergence and the target of its attack and the way that it has grown over the past 4 years. There are new dimensions that indicate that there is an international flavor. There are factions within Boko Haram itself. It makes it very difficult to know what exactly the group is agitating for. Yes, the local problems in the northeast, eastern part of Nigeria is part of the problem. It's part of the challenge of governance, the challenge of corruption, brutality from security forces. But Boko Haram has grown in such a way that it's become a bit more difficult to be able to put a category or a label on it. It's involved in brigandry, in robbery, in targeting.
I think I might have lost you there. So let me bring John Campbell back in. John, I mean, what a number of the other contributors seem to have been saying here is that that perhaps these kind of blanket designations are missing the essential element of local rootedness for these movements, and may therefore do more harm than good.
I quite agree with that. I agree with the previous comments to the effect that Boko Haram has emerged out of a specifically local situation. I also agree that there is no hard evidence of links between Boko Haram and Al-Qaeda. There is better evidence for links between Ansaru, a splinter group, and Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, but I haven't seen any convincing evidence of Boko Haram links. Further, with respect to the designation, what, as a practical matter, its impact will be on Boko Haram, I think is very little. After all, Boko Haram doesn't have significant financial assets in the United States, and members of Boko Haram are hardly going to be applying for visas to go to the U.S., and those are the two areas where the designation has a practical impact.
So, what do you think the purpose is then? I mean, if you're saying that the impact would be limited, quite what is the point then?
I think the point is essentially a political one. That what the designation does is it states publicly that Boko Haram is a threat. Designation requires it to be a threat to the United States. I think more realistically, it's a threat to the government of Nigeria, which is a friendly state.
Yeah, Olawale, I mean, we've got into trouble here before, haven't we? If the major powers are going to say a threat to every one of our local allies is a threat to us, this is a thread that could unravel rather badly.
Definitely, I think I agree with the ambassador that in terms of sanctions, financial sanctions and restrictions on financial dealings with Boko Haram, I think that is minimal. It's going to have very little or no impact. What I fear is that in other instances where the United States has declared certain organizations and certain individuals within those organizations as foreign terrorists or foreign terrorist organizations, you've had the United States military actually going all out to hunt down some of these individuals. You have evidence of that in Pakistan. You have evidence of that even in Somalia. And if this were to be the case in Nigeria, of course, one cannot know for sure what the likely outcome could be, but it might just further inflame the situation because of some already existing anti-American feelings that you have among some certain sections of the Muslim population. But beyond that, I actually feel that it might actually reinforce the Nigerian government's current approach to the Boko Haram problem, which is a military one. So far, the Nigerian government, the Nigerian state, has not published whatever strategy it is using as its counterterrorism strategy to counter the threat of Boko Haram beyond declaring state of emergency, deploying the military, and imposing curfew in certain areas. And we all know that counterterrorism cannot succeed with military means alone. I'm not saying military and security action are not necessary. Definitely, they are part of the options to be used. But you need, far more than that. It cannot just be about deploying the military or declaring state of emergencies. For how long are you going to do that? Currently, what you have is a strategic stalemate, which is the military are able to stop Boko Haram from launching high-profile attacks in major urban centers, but Boko Haram is still able to launch attacks in rural, communities, still wreaking havoc, attacking schools, attacking, people, traveling between states on the highway. So you're going to have that, and I don't think the military and the military approach is going to stop all of that. So what essentially is needed is a broader strategy, counterterrorism strategy, that includes some of the underlying issues of socioeconomic justice, political justice as well, and also issues around youth empowerment in Nigeria, and especially in the Northeast, and also bringing in authentic civil society to be part of that process. What you have at the moment is a half-hearted approach by the government to have political settlement and political dialogue as part of that process, and nothing has been said about the socioeconomic aspect of Boko Haram insurgency. So the Nigerian state needs to actually understand this reality, and I just fear that the American declaration of Boko Haram as a FTO might just reinforce that military approach.
Okay. David Lowe, do you think there's a different, perhaps, geopolitical dimension than the one that the advertised one here, that the United States might be thinking that at this particular juncture, especially with the Chinese now investment in sub-Saharan Africa exceeding that of the United States, that there's a requirement to get more involved here, to be taking more of a role here?
I think there's a possibility that that could be underlying it, because I think when I mentioned earlier with the UK actually making Boko Haram a prescribed organisation because they're part of the Commonwealth and there are Nigerian communities in the UK. I think the reason they did that here was about fundraising. I think you're right. You're looking at this American reaction, and of course, one issue is because Boko Haram are an Islamic group, that doesn't necessarily mean they have a similar cause to the groups we see like Al-Shabaab or Al-Qaeda. To me, as I said, I equate it earlier with the Caucasus. It was like the Basque separatists in Spain. I mean, the IRA in Ireland. I think they're after the northeastern states to be independent, and I think the danger is if we try and lump all the groups because of whatever religion they are together is a potential danger. As I said, there's no evidence to align them, to align them with any Al-Qaeda jihadist type cause. I think it is generally about having independence. And of course, as you mentioned earlier, Nigeria has natural resources which will be important to the West anyway, and I think it could be trying to protect those interests as well.
Okay, Mazi, let me go back to you in Nigeria itself. What's the understanding on the ground there? Is it now part of government propaganda that Boko Haram is an Al Qaeda offshoot, or is it something that really that's for foreign consumption? It's not really part of the kind of story that's being told on the ground in Nigeria.
I think that in Nigeria there is a sense that this is really simply a local problem, especially if you go into Yobe, Borno State. The people there understand the genesis of the emergence of Boko Haram, all the issues that give rise to this militant group's operations. And the Al-Qaeda connection is really difficult for people on the ground to imagine or to understand. Human Rights Watch has documented the various attacks by Boko Haram, and spoken to witnesses who describe the individuals that are involved in these operations. And mostly they are Nigerians. Almost every... Yes, and that's the understanding of the people in that region, that this is a Nigerian problem. These are local issues that should be dealt with by dealing with the issues that give rise, the factors that give rise to militancy. Like one of the earlier speakers said, it's not new in Nigeria, and it's not new in the northern part of the country. But you see, it's been played along the lines of the historic cleavages, religious cleavages, ethnic cleavages, and that's the understanding of the people on the ground.
Okay, let me bring John Campbell in. On that point, John, I mean, we've been here before. Isn't this one of the points where the whole kind of war on terror dialogue came unstuck, because what was being said by the major powers, their interpretation of what was happening, just didn't tally with the people on the ground. Just didn't make sense to the people on the ground. Are we not in danger of repeating that error here?
Yes, I think we are in danger of repeating that error. Those of us that opposed designation of Boko Haram as a foreign terrorist organization were very concerned that the designation, even if it had limited practical impact, would encourage the Nigerian government to pursue its essentially military approach to the insurrection in northern Nigeria, and that simply is not working. Further, I would put anxiety to rest about the possibility of American military involvement in northern Nigeria. In the aftermath of Iraq and Afghanistan, there is absolutely zero political support for that kind of military action.
Olawale, do you think that, are you worried about the kind of, if we agree with John's point there, and he makes an important point about the sort of unwillingness to actually deploy American troops, do you think that we're looking at a kind of, how should we put it, Yemenization of the situation, where America, as John was suggesting, backs a local government, encourages them to see this problem in the framework of the war on terror? Perhaps we'll be seeing the deployment of drones down the road. Is that a likely scenario?
Of course, I think John, the ambassador, would know better than me in terms of the current thinking in the American policy establishment. But I would never foreclose the possibility of drones, being deployed or being used, not just in the northeast part of Nigeria, but across the Sahel, because you've already had you have American drone bases in certain parts of Africa. So, and there are issues around drones already being used in Somalia. So, I would not foreclose that. But I do agree that the possibility of putting boots on the ground is extremely very remote and very thin. But beyond all of that, I think anybody who clearly loves Nigeria, loves the Nigerian state, should be telling the Nigerian government the right things to do about Boko Haram, which is essentially you need a proper counterterrorism strategy. They've talked about having a strategy, but nobody has seen it. But beyond just having a strategy, the Nigerian state actually needs to seriously confront the problem. I see the politicization of even the counterterrorism effort against Boko Haram. Politicization in the context of forthcoming election in 2015. I mean, I wouldn't want to go into the full details of it, but clearly there are certain political calculations behind behind the particular approach being taken.
I have to leave it there, I'm afraid. I'd like to thank my guest Olawale in the studio and all the guests that joined us by phone or by Skype. But do stay with us and rejoin us after the break.